I am very excited to introduce Jessica West here to my right, who is going to be moderating this first panel of the second day on space sustainability for all, the links between space security and space safety. Jessica West is a senior fellow at the Center for International Governance Innovation, who, as you know, one of our partners at this conference. So I'm very, very happy to hand it over to her. And maybe she wants to say a few more words about the panel and about the different experts that we have lined up for you this morning. Thank you very much. Jessica, the floor is yours.
So I was excited about the videos before I got here, and I have to say I was completely blown away by everything that I saw. So congratulations to the winners, but also everyone else who participated. That was phenomenal. And it's also a hard act to follow, so I'm going to try to build on it rather than follow. And I'm going to echo Erin's words and the theme, I think, that cut through the videos of this sense of legacy that brings us back to the value and the importance of sustaining outer space. So we have what we have today because of the legacy of the past, and to have this tomorrow, we have to continue to build on that legacy for future generations. And part of that sustainability legacy is really about this nexus of safety and security, which also was a theme that cut through the videos, and that's going to be the focus of our discussion right now. It's often within the United Nations bodies and within outer space governance, these topics of safety and security are often divvied up. And so yesterday, Ambassador Shen referred to them as different buckets that have different priorities. But sometimes when we're trying to look holistically at outer space, we find that there's spillover in the water between these buckets. And so that's what we're going to explore today. And so it's also building on yesterday's discussion, where this concept of dual use technology and the challenges that arise was sort of a prominent theme that cut through the different panels. And I think this panel picks up on that theme with something that I would call dual effect issues. We see that on the environment, where both safety and security are entwined with sustainability. We see that on technology, where similar technologies are entangled with one another and cut through both safety and security applications and risks. And we see that on the human impacts of outer space, where for many communities, disruptions to sustainability or safety have very real everyday security implications in their lives. And so we're going to dive into some of these cross-cutting themes, if you will, with a terrific panel. I'm pleased to say that the participants represent diverse experiences and backgrounds that include civil, commercial, military, and diplomatic experience. So I can't think of a better way to have this discussion. I'll introduce them briefly. To my right is Andrew Peebles. He's the External Relations Officer for the UN Office of Outer Space Affairs, otherwise known as UNUSA. He also brings with him experience working at COPUS on peaceful uses of outer space. He has arms control background and has also worked on export controls with the government of the United Kingdom. So welcome. We also have Chris Blackerby. Are we in order? Sort of. Chris is going to wave. I'm going off the sheet. So Chris Blackerby is Group Chief Operating Officer for Astroscale Holdings, which many of you might have heard of. It's the global leader in developing on-orbit satellite servicing solutions for safe and secure and sustainable development of space. And he also brings with him a previous career working in both the diplomatic and the executive management side of NASA. Online, I believe, yes. Hopefully, yes, welcome. We have Vasily Gudnov, who heads the Multilateral Cooperation Division in the International Cooperation Department of the State Space Corporation, or what most of us refer to as Roscosmos. He also brings a lot of experience to this role, including prior work on both the legal and the trade side of technology development and science. And we have Victoria Valdivia Cerda. She's a political scientist from Chile. Currently, she's a global fellow at the European Space Policy Institute and a lecturer associated with the Ministry of Defense in Chile. And she has also been a contributing voice on the Space for Women file. So with that, I'm going to open up some questions. I have a question for each speaker to allow them to make opening remarks, and then we'll have an interactive dialogue before we dive into some audience questions. So Andrew, I thought to get us started, given your experience working in the diplomacy of both space security and space safety and peaceful uses, I thought you could help us by sharing some of your thoughts on the relationships between them, issues that might have cut across both agendas, particularly as you have worked on them, those dual effect issues, if you will.
Perfect. Thank you, Jessica, for giving me the floor. And before I start, just a massive shout out to Jose, John Young, and Prajna for your videos. I thought they were very good, and I learned a lot actually. So respect. Before I start, I want to break the fourth wall and just ask: put your hand up if you can confidently say what the UN Office for Outer Space Affairs does, or what the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space does. Copy us. Okay, it's more than last year. That's respect. All right, I'm slowly getting there. So 20-second elevator pitch, just so that you're up to speed on Copious, what we do in Vienna, because we're actually closer to space now, rather than between Vienna and Geneva, we're actually closer to space. So we're not so far away, but far away. So the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space has really been at the forefront of developing the international global governance of outer space over the last 65 years. That's the treaties, the principles, the resolutions, the guidelines, everything, all of the rules of the road for how you as countries, industry, etc., operate with one another and how you develop your national space legislation. And we as ENUSA, we serve as the civil servants or the secretariat to the member states in Vienna to develop global governance around long-term sustainability of outer space activities. So the LTS guidelines, applications of space for the Sustainable Development Goals, the use of nuclear power sources in outer space, and also space resources. So that's the elevator pitch, right? We're all up to speed. Good. So what I would say is all eyes are really on the international community to really address some of these key topics that you've mentioned around space safety, sustainability, and security. And sustainability really is at the heart of these discussions. I think when we talk about the nexus of space safety and space security, I think we automatically think about things like active debris removal and the work that Astroscale has been doing. But from our perspective in Vienna, it's a lot broader than that. It's about on-orbit servicing and this is different issues such as proximity operations, which cut across both agendas. It's also things like recycling and cannibalization of hardware in space. It touches on manufacturing of space objects that are currently in orbit. So there's all of these new and novel space activities that are being considered, which cut across both the peaceful uses of outer space and the security aspects, which different bodies within the United Nations address, as you heard on the panel yesterday. I saw from your videos, you talked a lot about transparency and understanding really who owns what in space. And I think transparency and confidence building measures are really key for both the safety and security elements of space activities. And one of the key historical functions how it relates to our work has been that the register of objects launched into outer space, so the UN register, which we as ENUSA, we maintain on behalf of the Secretary General. The UN register, it encompasses both military objects and civilian objects, so countries register both with us. So it really helps us understand what the very question of who owns what in space, and it's applicable for things like liability, active debris removal in the future, so that we can really address some of those issues. I think one of the things from our perspective in Vienna is not just talking about new guidelines or is the Outer Space Treaty still applicable? Does it need to be updated? But we're really focused on implementation of global governance and understanding what standards look like, how you translate these pieces of paper into practice, because if they're not implemented, they're just words on a paper. So as an office and ENUSA, we're really interested to work with you, work with industry, reach outside of our traditional bubbles, both in Vienna and Geneva, to really tackle some of these key issues, such as deorbiting. So one of the things that we would like to do, and we're in conversation with the likes of Astroscale on and others, is identifying objects that are currently in space that could be deorbited. So if we can identify these objects because they pose a risk or a hazard to space activities, then they could be taken down. So for us, it's about, from a peaceful uses angle, if we take active debris removal as an example, It's really understanding what is the size of the market in the future, what are the investment opportunities in the future, how do we drive and create that market so that we can actually understand who pays for active debris removal. So I understand that's slightly different from the security angle, but this is where we're coming at it from. Take another example. So rendezvous and proximity operations, dual use, that's dual use in nature. One very easy way to break that down could be from a peaceful uses angle, safety angle, establishing consent procedures. So that could be between the servicer and the service spacecraft. So really looking at what procedures could be established internationally to address the safety aspect. Take the disarmament aspect in Geneva. The same issue of rendezvous and proximity operations could be dealt with in terms of non-cooperative rendezvous and proximity operations, trying to really get to the heart of misperceptions and misunderstandings. So that's just one issue. They're the two issues: active debris removal and rendezvous and proximity operations. We're also really keen that when we're looking at these types of activities, such as on-orbit servicing, that we're not just reinventing the wheel. There's a lot of work that's already been done by you as member states internationally to really go through and develop the kind of the norms and the standards for what, for example, on-orbit servicing manufacturing. Japan has done a lot of work on that. So these are issues which we take the LTS guidelines that were agreed by consensus in Vienna in 2019 and address, for example, the guideline D2, which is around managing space debris. There's already been work that's been done at the international level whereby we can take what Japan is doing, we can look at their practices, and we can internationalize those so that we're actually understanding the kind of safety aspect of the work. I'll stop there for now, and I'll come back around later on. Thank you.
Yes, I want to come back to that question as a panel on turning paper into practice. It's a great way to phrase it. Am I picking up? Yeah. Okay, perfect. I do want to change gears and turn to our online panelist, Vasily. Vasily has extensive experience working on multilateral cooperation on the civilian side of space through his role at Roscosmos. And I'm hoping you can share some of your experiences and thoughts on this nexus of safety and security as it affects your work, the opportunities and challenges that you face when it comes to multilateral cooperation.
Thank you, Jessica. And I would like to say that I am very proud to be invited to participate in this conference and share our views. Certainly, during our work, many times we have heard this combination of worrying, security and safety. And first of all, I'm not an English native speaker, but we found some differences between those definitions, and those reflected two different approaches. For example, in our view, safety is just a state that we would like to achieve, and through using some measures and to safeguard our people, our assets from some unintentional accidents. Then we are talking about the security. It's the protection against the deliberate accidents, such as possible attacks or something like that. And both certainly affect our ability to maintain sustainable space activities in accordance with our national plans. So those two aspects are in my duty, and we work commonly with our Ministry of Foreign Affairs and with our Ministry of Defense to provide some proposals for national policy, how to create and maintain those conditions that could allow us to lead our national space programs in sustainable manner and overall taking into account the international aspects of space activities. In in our point of view, the most important question, what is the source of threats and challenges to the security and to the safety of space activities? And many times in Copius and on Geneva platform, I expressed my view that in our point of view, problems that arise naturally and arise as a consequences of space operations, of space activities, natural problems like carbon emissions, and you use the combustible engine. But there are another source of threats that produced from some policies, from some decision making, and from maybe some actions of or intentional actions of other space actors, or I mean other countries. That means that quite very differences between those two sources of threats and problems. And we suppose that first part of them that are naturally considered as a consequences and directly related to space activities should be discussed in Copius, and now they form the agenda of Copius and its subcommittees. And those issues that related to how to not to prevent, how to maintain or to space convenient and available for future and sustainable use for peaceful purposes. It's very important questions that should be discussed at Geneva platform in our point of view, because we certainly share the opinion of our colleagues from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, from the Ministry of Defense, and our Chinese colleagues. For example, I heard the discourse of Professor Shen yesterday, that it's very important to prevent weaponization and arms race in outer space, because in that case, we will stop to discuss the peaceful uses of outer space. It's our point of view. If I answer your questions, Jessica.
Yes, you absolutely did. Thank you so much. I really like that framing of accidents and intentional accidents, both of which are problematic for stability and the ability of civilian space agencies such as Roscosmos to use space. So I'm going to borrow that in the future, if you don't mind. Next, we're going to turn to Chris and maybe think a little bit about this issue of dual-use technology. I'm wondering if you can share thoughts on how states ensure that objects are used for, no, sorry, we're going to go up. So we're going to take a little bit of a step back and remind everybody that Chris is joining us from the commercial sector and from an organization that is engaged in technology development that we've been talking about, rendezvous and proximity operations, satellite servicing, and this is, of course, dual-use technology. So how do safety and security fit into the work that you do and the way that you do your work?
Well, thank you, Jessica, first of all, and thank you to Unidir for inviting me to speak. As was referenced earlier, I used to work for NASA in Washington, D.C. in the International Relations and Policy shop. I also was the NASA attaché at the embassy, U.S. Embassy in Tokyo for 5 years. So as a former aspiring diplomat, being in a room like this is exciting. I had joined many of these conversations in past lives, and it's always stimulating to see how people from around the world can get together to solve problems. So it's wonderful to be here. Now, though, as noted, I am the COO of Astroscale, where I have been the last 7 years. And Astroscale, I could ask the same question that Anthony did. How many people know about Astroscale in the room? Okay, a pretty good number. Let me give my
We need your comms team.
let me give my quick elevator pitch for those who don't know. We are dedicated, and we have been since our founding 11 years ago, to the safe and sustainable development of space for the benefit of future generations. Watching those videos today of the three of you, it encapsulated everything that we've thought about for the last decade. And to do that, we are leading the conversation from a commercial side. So we want to be the thought leaders, the people that are helping to help you drive policies globally. But as referenced by Jessica, we're also developing the technical capabilities to do these operations. And you talked about ADR, Anthony, and that is what we're working on. But to do that, we need to be able to develop safe, effective, affordable, rendezvous and proximity operations capabilities. We need to be able to identify an object in orbit, come close to it, match its rotation, move in, and attach to it. I don't need to tell this group what you already said. These are dual use capabilities. We recognize that. We recognize the sensitivities around this technology, as any new novel technology brings sensitivities, risks, concerns. So we want to be able to discuss that in this group. The fact is, though, without a capability to do what we want to do, which, to be clear, is much more than active debris removal, we think that our space community needs post-sales servicing of satellites. When you think about anything you buy on Earth now, you expect that you'll service it. You're not buying a car with the full amount of gas that that car will ever need and then trashing it. Companies aren't buying airplanes with the expectation that if a chip hits the windshield, that they'll throw it away. There's a post-sales servicing aspect to any ecosystem, except space. There is no post-sales servicing aspect in space. When you purchase a satellite, you have all the fuel it's going to use. You have all the components are there. If they break, oh well, it's done. If it runs out of fuel, it's okay. Let's build another one for a couple $100 million. That is not the way to build an efficient economy. And so we want to take steps to support that. So the conversation around this question of how to make that safe and how to make that secure is what this group is talking about and what we want to be a part of. As far as how we do that with our mission so far, we follow the rules, we apply for licenses, we make sure we are completely open about what we're doing. Obviously, we get permission to do the approaches that we're doing. In orbit, we have operational safety built into our company. It is the highest priority of what we do. If there is an anomaly on orbit or an abort situation, it is built into our spacecraft. And that is something that we will always make the highest priority. So we want to have this conversation with you. And I'm really honored that Astroscale is here to represent and to talk and to be a part of this discussion. But as was discussed yesterday, the commercial space sector is growing so quickly. And when I look around this room, I see myself and I see Darren in the back left there from Leo Labs. You'll get to hear from later as the two commercial representatives in the conversation. And that's good. That's a good start. Obviously, this is a conversation among states and among diplomats and among non-state discussions and UN. But having a voice from the commercial sector is going to be essential. And I think we all heard that yesterday as we heard again and again conversations around, well, how are we going to bring in the commercial sector? What do we do with these non-state actors? How are we going to all work together on this? So I would humbly submit, this is my first time here at a Unity conference, so I'm sorry to be so bold, but I would humbly submit that in the future, it would be great to have a panel like this made up of commercial representatives. I can't speak for the entire commercial community, obviously. So having some representatives from different industries, Earth observation, communications, the nascent commercial human spaceflight sector, on-orbit satellite servicing, which we bring, having a panel like that to talk about this would be a great step to expanding the conversation and having a real positive give and take about how we're going to address a lot of these issues. So look forward to talking more. Thank you, Jessica.
Thank you. I really appreciated the emphasis on rule following and licensing and permission, all the good behavior kind of actions that I envision Astroscale engaging in. We're going to switch our view a little bit from space back down to Earth, because Victoria, you are uniquely positioned, I think, to help us explore, and I use that word intentionally, how issues related to this intersection of sustainability, safety, and security in space are not just about space, they're also about Earth. And I'll invite you to take the floor and speak to that topic.
Thank you, Jessica, for the question. Yeah, usually when we talk about the space debris and all the kind of phenomena happening in outer space, we just are thinking about outer space, but we are not connecting this kind of phenomena with the life of people on Earth. And I'm pretty sure that most of this room used to live the most part of the year in this planet. So it's being impacted about the space debris coming and re-entering into the Earth. So it's a huge opportunity for me to bring to this room and to talk about Antarctic and the effects of a space debris over the Point Nemo and its implication for international security from a humanitarian and human security perspective, by the way. In first term, I want to tell you about this remote and isolated area called Point Nemo. Point Nemo is a maritime area located in the South Pacific Ocean. So it's a very, very isolated spot in our planet. And just to know, as a fun fact, the nearest humans to Point Nemo are often the astronauts on the International Space Station. So for that reason, and regarding its isolated condition, on 1970, Point Nemo was defined as the safer area for controlled re-entries of space platforms, components, and among other stuff. And since then, it has been accumulating space of debris on the ocean floor. However, the Point Nemo is not a so isolated area, because this maritime area is interactive with maritime ecosystems, and particularly with the currents, and potentially spreading the effect of technological pollution through the entire world, impacting to coastal communities, but also on large phenomena such as climate change. Hence, despite the risks of debris causing direct harm, overpopulation or critical infrastructure in Point Nemo is very low, the potential long-term effects on the environment are not something that we can ignore. But also in this interaction is creating several challenges for international security and peace due to its implication on the Antarctic Treaty System, particularly on the Environment Protocol to the Antarctic Treaty, that is very critical to maintain the peaceful uses of the Antarctic continent. So I have mentioned Antarctic, space, debris, an isolated place called Point Nemo. But now let's turn to attention to Antarctic continent. I know that is quite weird because we are talking about outer space security, but believe me, I have a point of this. This continent, Antarctic continent, is a vital part of our planet climate system. And of course, it is a symbol of international cooperation, where the natural system composed by the landmass and the Antarctic circumpolar current regulates the world climate. So whatever is happening on Antarctic, any kind of change over the circular current will be impacting the entire world community. Scientists from around the world comes to Antarctic to study, to learn, to conduct scientific activities, and to ensure that this research remains and peaceful, and it focuses on preserving Antarctic for future generations, very similar to outer space. Therefore, the creation of a space of repollution, the end of life of satellite platforms, or the intentional harms over those platforms are impacting the Antarctic environment, because it increases the number of space debris being accumulated over the circumpolar Antarctic current. Right now, today, last year in Antarctic, we faced several challenges regarding climate change. For example, in the Chilean Army Research Facility, the Vaso Higgins on the peninsula, during all the winter, we only have rain. That is very critical, and probably will be explaining certain phenomena happening here in Europe during this winter. Now, From safety perspective, the natural condition of Antarctic continent defines a very dangerous environment for human life. I mean, try to think about that. You are alone, isolated in a very, very difficult and very different continent surrounded by extreme environment. You will need support and logistical support from third countries. So in Antarctic, the capability to surviving remains on international cooperation, similar to the moon. Well, the access to the search and rescue capabilities on Antarctic are very critical because we need to improve the resilience of SAR and CSAR tasks on Antarctic in order to be capable to bring safely to home to scientists acting under the umbrella of the Antarctic Treaty System, because they are a key component on the idea of the Antarctic peace. So any kind of disruption on the access to space capability during a SAR or CSAR task will impact directly in the capability to rescue or recover people in extremely danger, observing also humanitarian aspects. Addressing this problem, of course, requires a collaborative approach. No one single country can manage space debris alone, can recover Point Nemo, or can assure the space safety, the resilient access to space capabilities during a SAR or CSAR task operation. And believe me, dear colleagues, I know very well about SAR and CSAR on Antarctic and how difficult it is to conduct this kind of operation. We need international agreements and cooperation to ensure that we handle our space activities responsibly. This means developing better ways to track and to manage debris, creating guidelines for the end-of-life disposal of satellites coming into Point Nemo, and being responsible about the pollution being accumulated on our maritime areas. And of course, working together to prevent a space collision, but also raising the consensus on keeping Antarctic and connected ecosystem free from constant space hazard, because these areas are critical for the international security and particularly for the security of scientists, the security of individuals acting to preserving the peace of the most important point of this planet. Thank you, yes.
Okay, that was a lot to take in, but I think it's certainly clear that what we're talking about affects people all over the world. And I am now going to use your anecdote about astronauts on the space station being closer to people in Point Nemo than other people are, because it reminds us of how close outer space is and how entwined we are with it. So that's fabulous. I'm going to do one more quick round of responses by the panelists. We're going to shift to a focus, I think, for each of you that picks up on Andrew's point about shifting from paper to practice. And so thinking about some of the practical steps that can or should be taken that can help get us further along when it comes to either security or safety or how those work together. And I'm going to turn the floor first to Vasily to comment on that, because he's also been involved at UN COPUS on the long-term sustainability guidelines, and Andrew had made mention of those in his opening remarks. There's a wealth of practices, I think, that have been developing on paper, and I'm not sure how we're doing or how we get from agreements on paper to implementing them. So if you want to share additional remarks on that point, Vasily.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Jessica. As I said previously, typically safety measures are implemented beforehand to prevent accidents or injuries they could occur. And security measures, in our point of view, implemented as a reaction to possible response to some activities of other states, maybe criminals or other source of threats that could affect our ability to maintain our space programs. So we work in two branches, and we are trying to improve our space assets, our satellites, our spacecraft to be more reliable, more safe, and we train our personnel. We are trying to maintain those operations in space in a safe manner, and that means that we are trying not to affect other actors by completing different kind of operations. And then we are talking about the safety. We are talking about safety of space operations. That means we are thinking to protect about the protection of another satellites, another assets, another people, but also together with our governmental bodies involved, concerned in security issues and defense, we work on security measures, and was aimed to provide us with some tools and some state that will allow us to conduct our space programs, as I said, in sustainable manner, and certainly for peaceful uses. Despite Roscosmos is responsible to, as a governmental body, to control and space activities for the economical development of the Russian Federation and its region, but together with the Ministry of Defense, we are working to and provide some proposals for national policy in security of state. Because you know, and everybody recognized that space assets and space technology play incredible role in all branches of economy, and it's very vital for the defense and to protect states' interests against any kind of aggression, for example. So then we are talking about what measures we are trying to implement. I would like to clarify that there are some rumors that Russia has plans to install some nuclear weapons in space. It's ridiculous. In our point of view, many times we said and demonstrated that we are working on nuclear power supply for space assets as a more reliable and with a long period of lifetime. But nobody concerned about those spacecraft like Voyagers, I suppose, that had already had such nuclear power engines, and there is ridiculous. But then I have heard several serious proposals from our colleagues to maintain in space some nuclear weapons for the planetary defense, to destroy some asteroids that possibly could affect the Earth, that it's very dangerous. We suppose that this case is possible only when all nations will be truly and very friends, and there is enormous understanding and enormous, I could say, support from all nations of such idea, because certainly that it's as we used to say, dual use systems that could be applied not only against asteroids and to protect the Earth, but if they are at the response and under control of the only nation, it's very dangerous, because it depends on the policy and the relationship of such a state with other states and with other participants. And it fully depends on geopolitics situation, geopolitical situations that is deteriorated for now. And in my own work, many times we made analysis on different policies and different approaches used by governmental bodies. For example, we study some decrees, some laws of our American colleagues, of our European colleagues, of our colleagues from Asia Pacific region, from Africa, from Latin America, trying to find something in common in the policy, and that form the main part of our position at Copios, because despite the differences in approaches how to achieve the long-term sustainability for space activities, we see some issues that could be solved and addressed commonly, despite the political disagreements and the political situations. And I'm sure we should continue our work on LTS guidelines, and overall with the proposals of our United Kingdom colleagues with the table they proposed, we would like to modify a little bit these proposals and indicate in the first columns those threats, commonly categorized threats to the safety of space assets, to the safety of space operations, and naturally produced as a consequences of using space assets, using different techniques, using different technologies for space assets, and from different approaches that space actors applied during space activities. And the second column could include the possible negative impact of such threats and such problems, and what they could affect and how they could affect. And the last columns could include those guidelines or maybe references to the existing guidelines that could address the problems indicated, and maybe they could be different, because guideline is just a recommendation based on best practices of every space actor. And we have differences in our practices, and we have differences, but we trying to achieve the same goal. So in our point of view, the guidelines that address, for example, space debris removal, space debris mitigation, could be different. They could be maybe different approaches how to achieve the goal and reduce the quantity of such objects we use to name space debris. But certainly, first of all, we should come to the internationally recognized and internationally accepted definition. What is the space debris object? And it should be discussed, because we are trying to implement, we are trying to design some guidelines using some definitions, but certainly we do not have internationally accepted definitions we use in our guidelines, and that could produce misunderstanding, that could produce different approaches, even contradictional approaches, trying to achieve the same goal. There is no bad intentions, but I suppose unintentionally we could come to different and to misunderstanding, trying to achieve those good goals, and to maintain outer space available for future generations, available for use, but instead of that, using different techniques. And
Lastly, I'm just gonna
sorry.
if you want to quickly wrap up, or if we're ready to, because there's so many themes that are opening up the floor for everyone else.
So Jessica, my proposal that we should pay more attention during Copios and for those questions on definitions, and produce the internationally accepted definition and lexicon for international communities. Thank you.
I think you really set the stage very well to dive over to Chris, who's going to talk about some of the really day-to-day practicalities of operating in using technology that is very much dual use, not nuclear, but dual use in other ways. So can you comment briefly on how do you do this? How do you make sure that the international community feels safe and secure when you're using that technology?
First, to think about how that happens among states is a question way above my pay grade. So I leave that to the diplomats and people in this room to do so. But in a room as diverse as this, there's obviously going to be some disagreements or some different approaches to how things are done. But as Vasily said, we all have the same goal here: commercial, civil, security, international organizations. All of us have the goal to maintain a safe and sustainable orbital environment. Any of the benefits that we get right now from assets in space will not be able to be utilized by our children and their children if we don't take steps now to actively and productively change things. And so I think with what Vasily was saying is along that same idea that we do have the same goal, and it's incumbent on all of us now to get together and make sure that we develop the right processes, the right procedures to make things safe, and to have active communication around making sure that that happens. As for us at Astroscale, I mentioned earlier, what we do is we do follow all of the guidelines that are necessary, from getting the licenses to actual operations in orbit. And we will continue to do so. We will continue to consider who our customers are, who our clients are, and continue to work with them to assure that what we're doing is benefiting the future sustainability of space. Now, where we can have more active conversations, Vasily mentioned UNUSA, of course, in this forum is great. As I mentioned earlier, having the commercial community brought into the discussion is going to be important. One way that we're trying to drive that is through a group called CONFERS, CONFERS, if you want to look it up and you don't know about it. But CONFERS was a group that was started about 7 years ago. It was started with 5 commercial companies, initially under the US government. We have now moved out to be an independent industry group that is focused on developing the best practices, developing the standards around servicing of satellites. So CONFERS, where it started with 5 companies, there's now over 80. Over 80 companies around the world getting together to talk about how to do servicing of satellites in the safest, most beneficial way. It is, as far as I know, the only organization, the only group that is actively addressing this with a real commercial mindset. And that's important because there are so many aspects to consider around this, as mentioned earlier, about so many new companies that are joining the space community. Having that input is extremely valuable. So while CONFERS is mostly commercial, we do have government observers. So we are opening it up to having that two-way conversation, to having multiple stakeholders in the room to decide what's the best way to develop the right processes, to develop the right standards, to assure that we're all moving toward the same goal of a sustainable orbital environment. I'll stop there on this one and address other topics later.
I like the way we keep building on each other's comments to create a comprehensive conversation, sort of like comprehensive space security. Victoria, do you want to add some comments to this issue of the practicalities and the implementation of the nexus of safety and security from your perspective?
You know, because I was ready for talking about the other one, but yes, I want to make it going now. Yeah, I know. I mean, all about the implementation and creating non-binding and binding norms are very fascinating. I mean, for me, coming from maybe the last point on Earth before Antarctica, it's always impressive to see you guys trying to do something good. However, and this is a big point, most part of time, all the kind of norms and decided word that we used to draw in very polluted norms are not applicable for all the kind of space actors. The lack of awareness in first term, a lack of capabilities, second term, but in a third and very, very important level, because not all the time that the political decision makers are involved into space activities. So different part of the world created different kind of space ecosystems. For example, on my country, the space ecosystem is composed mostly by technicians. So try to explain, really, I beg to try to do this, try to explain to an engineer why space diplomacy is also a space capability. So starting from this point, I think that the most important thing on the implementation of norms is being capable to raise awareness, to educate people, to have enough consciousness about the consequences of any kind of space activities, despite if you are a big space nation or not. If you are a customer, a user, you are dependent, or you are autonomous in outer space. So I wanted to connect, if I have enough time, with my particular experience, because I talked about space safety and security and trying to summarize over the case on Antarctica. So I mentioned it, the SAR and CSAR task operation, basically search and rescue, okay? So being a woman in security and space area is always a huge challenge for us. I mean, try to compatibilize to be mom, to be professional, to get involved with even with military and defense side that have a different culture framework. But I realized that any single step that we take to improve safety and security in outer space has a direct impact on the life of people. And I want to tell you about Claudia Manso. It's very important, and please apologize myself in advance if I started to cry, because Claudia was my colleague during my service tenure in the Air Force, and she is the first Chilean martyr on Antarctic sciences. She died in 2018 during the accident of one aircraft over the Drake Passage, going to Antarctic to work. Claudia was a mom, was a scientific such as, and also a researcher, and she was a woman in peace and security. When Claudia suffered this terrible accident, and I get noted, doing my relation and doing my position on those times, I was involved in the search and rescue task, particularly trying to coordinate the international level. So I was suddenly in charge on calling people around the world, calling friends, and to the so many conferences for that and for the friendship created through this kind of instance. And trying to collect data, trying to get support, calling to international organization, activating some agreement, international agreement like the charter. Until that day, the charter for my international disaster for me was some theoretical framework. But early that day becomes into a reality and a real functional tool for what to be able to get the data to perform as an accurate, efficient operation for recovering the body of my friend and being able to bring her to her home again. I know it's very uncommon to talk about the human side and this kind of emotional aspects surrounding the space activities. But I think that we must keep the vision that any single thing that we are doing in outer space has a correlate in the life, in the daily life of persons, civilians, stakeholders, researchers, common people. Because at the end, we are just people trying to do something, trying to get some goals in order to improve our daily life, the daily life for our communities. For that reason, and finally, I think that to talk about space security and safety is not only something happening in outer space. It's something impacting the capability to recover our friends during major natural disasters and put it in the center, the most unbelievable thing, the human security and the capability of each of us to return into our home. Thank you, Jess.
Thank you, Victoria. That's a powerful story. So we've been talking about Andrew's point about from paper to practice. We've looked at definitions, so that the challenges at the very high diplomatic level to commercial collaboration to the impacts that this has on individual human lives. Andrew, do you want to bring us back to this theme and maybe reflect on how do we bring this? I'm going to ask you, can you bring this together for us? How do we move forward in a comprehensive way with these discussions?
Tough question, thank you. Well, I think from our perspective as ANUSA, we're very much aware that all eyes are on the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space to really develop the next level of governance and address some of these key issues. And I'd like to draw on Chris's point about how the private sector actually is developing a lot of these capabilities and technologies. And when so many of these objects are being launched by the private sector, and when so many of these solutions are also being developed by the private sector, they do need to be part of that discussion. It can't just be diplomats speaking within a bubble. It needs to be comprehensive, but recognizing the fact that when it comes to the UN level, yes, decisions are taken by the member states. That is very much the prerogative of member states. But also on the private sector point, you may be aware that the recently appointed director of ANUSA, Ati Holamaini, she does come from the private sector. So it's very much her ambition to try to bring together all relevant actors to provide some of these solutions. On the holistic approach, comprehensive approach, I think what we've seen from this panel as well is that there are so many different activities that are being undertaken, whether it's in COPUOS to develop new guidelines, whether it's conversations around possible coordination mechanisms to bring together the right players to answer some of the key questions. At ANUSA, we're very much keen that we can support everybody on the journey to actually implementing some of these guidelines, trying to understand what does implementation look like, what solutions can be found at the national level, which can be internationalized through the likes of COPUOS. And I think Vasily made a good point that there is already buy-in on the LTS guidelines, and there is a shared political will behind it to implement it. Coming back to how can we bring some of these thoughts and ideas and discussions around safety and security together? I mean, one practical example would be kinetic ASAT tests. So the very act of the test is a security matter. It's state-on-state behavior. But then again, the fallout of said acts is a matter for sustainability and remediation and space debris removal and the impact on the orbital environment. So that's very one practical example whereby the work that's done in Geneva, Conference on Disarmament, OEWG, GGE, is all critical, but also where the COPUOS angle within the United Nations could come into it. I think we're also aware that there are opportunities for cross-contamination of ideas, at least within the UN and more broadly. And I think events like this today are one good example of that. There will be an event in October at the UN General Assembly in New York, which is a meeting between the first committee of the UN that deals with security and the fourth committee of the UN that deals with the peaceful sides of space, and that will focus on space traffic coordination and management. So again, there are opportunities out there, and we very much welcome UNIDIA's leading effort to bring us all to the table and have this conversation. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Questions. A reminder to people online that you can post them in the Q&A, and people here, you can raise your hand. I'll just say I'd be remiss if I didn't plug the lexicon that UNIDIA has created when we were talking about definitions, and I think some of that technical aid is something that's also cut across the podium today. I'm going to start with in-person, so Thomas, do you want to take the floor?
Sure, thanks Jessica. Thank you to the panelists for joining us. My question is for Vasily online. you mentioned in your remarks that we should pay more attention as an international society in COPUS to agree upon definitions in space security. And just like Jessica mentioned, I want to recognize the effort in civil society to do just that with the lexicon in space security published at UNIDIR, edited by two colleagues sitting here in the room. And I wanted to ask a pointed question. Are there any definitions in that document, if you're familiar with it, that you disagree with, even in your personal capacity? And if so, what are they? Thank you.
Yes, I studied the lexicon for space security provided by Victoria and Modena, but certainly there are some definitions we are not agreed to. For example, definition on space debris. In our point of view, then we are talking about such kind of space objects, and I would like to remind that those objects we are used to title as a space debris and quoted just space objects due to definitions commonly recognized in COPUS, because they are parts of spacecraft or parts of launchers that belongs to certain launching states or state of registry. And in that case, they are under jurisdictions and control of the launching state. That means then we are talking about space debris. We consider, for example, collision, how you could collide with the whole community of such kind of objects. We are talking about the collision with the object of space debris or with some objects of space debris, but not with space debris as phenomena. You could not collide phenomena. So we need a definition, what is the object of space debris? And this definition provided by the interagency EIDC as non-functional object. It's not convenient for us because it doesn't take into account that such kind of objects is still under jurisdiction and control of the launching state. And for example, if you came into interaction with such kind of objects, space objects, that are still under control of another state, it could, without the certain permission of the launching state, it could produce some misunderstanding and could be recognized and could be stated as a violation of the right of the launching state and produce some kind of conflicts. I tried. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Does anyone have a burning desire to weigh in before we take additional questions? I saw that Jose had his hand raised, so I'm going to give you the floor.
Okay, well, thanks. First of all, I would like to point out how firmly I believe in the intersection between youth and technological development and the challenges they face, and how we must foster this relationship. And wanted to take the moment to thank ZG and Unity for this huge opportunity. I'm so grateful. Relating the questions, I have 3 question marks, but I promise they are related. Considering the intersection of space security and space safety, and leveraging on the diverse expertise of the panel, what strategies would you recommend for emerging space nations like Argentina and Chile to develop a robust space ecosystem? Specifically, how can they capitalize on public-private partnerships and international cooperations to enhance both their space security capabilities and broader opportunities in space exploration? Additionally, what unique opportunities does space offer emerging nations in terms of technological development, economic growth, and their role in global security frameworks? Thanks.
So I'm going to look for nods of people who want to weigh in on the theme really of emerging space actors and specifically states and how they develop capacity in this issue, which is something you spoke to earlier, Victoria, but great. And also the value of cooperation.
Okay.
And or take your pick.
So Jose, thank you for your question. It's always something good knowing that in the future I will have a future college coming from South America too. Yeah, how to capitalize? It's complicated, but I invite you to think about and read it based on the case logical. I mean, Argentina is a very different ecosystem than Chile, Peru, Bolivia, because our region is very heterogeneous. And despite all of us, we are new space actors. We are very different. For example, in the case of Argentina, you have a complex ecosystem composed by a national space agency. You have integrated a private sector, academics. So probably after get graduated, you will have a place to work in your country. Yeah, that is very different, for example, on the Chilean case, Bolivia, Peru, Ecuador, Paraguay, and even more Uruguay. I mean, every single country has a particular reality. So depending on cultural aspect, historical, political process, among other drivers. So the answer to your question on how to capitalize, in first there must be knowing your reality. Finding the model that will work for your country, for your society, and will be answer the public concerns belonging to your country. Because, for example, the successful case of NASA, Roscosmos, or theater space agencies are focused on solving public concerns from their own communities. Will not be functional for Argentina or for Chile trying to copy foreign models, because probably we will be answering and creating public policies to solve public concerns of their communities, avoiding to considering some national aspects such as geography, isolated areas, infrastructure, among others. And international collaboration has a very, very good side on this. Despite the level of development on space activities, all the countries as a space actor, as international actor to be clear, has the right to collaborate, integrate, and participate into international activities, and particularly on multilateral forums. So again, to have the capability to exploit this kind of opportunities, to get more integrated with international space community, access to knowledge transference, sharing technology, getting access to data, and being exposed to space activities, will rely on the awareness of the national stakeholders in order to address that kind of opportunities. So all relies on the capability of awareness inside your own community and inside your political level.
Just very quickly, I think from our perspective as ANUSA, we're very much conscious that not every country needs to get to the moon. Not every country needs an indigenous satellite which can operate domestically, but it's about access to space data, services, applications which can be used for the benefit of their sustainable development. I'll give you one practical example of how we've helped a country. I mean, Kenya. In 2019, they won a competition with us alongside JAXA, Japan, to deploy a satellite and develop a satellite from the University of Nairobi and deploy that from the International Space Station. Great achievement, but that in itself was a catalyst for the establishment of a national space agency, for the registration of an object. So starting to help Kenya really think about applying international law to its domestic capabilities. 2 years later, Kenya regionally, working with Uganda and Egypt, developed a climate monitoring camera, which again would be deployed on the International Space Station. 2019, 2021, 2023, we went back and helped Kenya draft its national space legislation. So again, just as a hook, scientific hook, we've been able to transform an entire country. And I think part of that journey as well is the recognition that what really drives a space ecosystem is creating a predictable regulatory environment, applying the international standards that you as member states spend so many years negotiating and agreeing through the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. And when you have that national legislation, say, look, we're responsible, we're transparent, you understand our regulatory environment, and that's when investment comes. So again, it's trying to see that comprehensive approach to how we can help countries on their spacefaring journey.
There are questions and responses. I'm going to give the floor to China. Your placard has been raised for quite a while, and then I'm going to take a collection of questions from online.
My questions will be very brief, and my first question is about the is how the content of Antarctic Treaty, in particular Article 1, will contribute to filling the gap of the existing international space law. So my question will go to Victoria, since you mentioned Article Treaty in your presentation. And my second question is about the, agreeing with China, we also agree to take the holistic approach in addressing space security, while we also think we should focusing on the addressing the weaponization of outer space and sticking to the the goal of perils. So my second question go to Mr. Pibbles and the Mr. Goodenough. Thank you.
Filling gaps in space law and Antarctic holistic approach, but I'm going to lump in a few others that we can go down the panel. So there's some terrific questions from online. One is focused on the ability to reuse space objects. And I think that is something that Chris mentioned earlier. We don't have sort of this systematic end of life approach. When you buy something, it turns into junk. That might be a bit harsh. And also another question that's related to that about trusting the private sector. And how we can have trust in their ability to have the right policies and to have, I think, I'm going to paraphrase this as public good in mind and not just private good. And so we can maybe go down the panel with that quickly and do some succinct remarks.
Start with that one.
Yeah, so there's kind of three. So Victoria, we'll turn to you really quickly. And then I think Chris, and then Andrew and Vasily.
It doesn't. Article number 1 on the Antarctic Treaty talks about weapons, inter alia, chemical, inter alia, okay? But we are talking about capabilities. There is a little difference between a weapon and a capability, because a capability involves knowledge, technologies, techniques, and tactics, not only new kind of weapons. So if we can define this new kind of weapons, of course, you cannot deploy them from Antarctic, but also we are talking about to put weapons on Antarctic, not to wearing on exploiting technologies from Antarctic to create damage or other side effects in something that is outside the Antarctic continent. So basically, we have a gap to solve between the Antarctic Treaty System and the Antarctic Treaty System. In my vision, we need to propose an addendum to both treaties in order to fill in that gap, because Article number 1, it doesn't cover it.
Thank you. So as for the systemic end of life aspects, it is something that we're very cognizant of and thinking about, and it connects a lot to what you were talking about too, Victoria, with the re-entry of objects into the atmosphere. At this point in time, we're still developing the technology. It's still very nascent. It's early stage, what we're working on. And our near-term plans are to capture debris, of which, to Vasily's question, always has the approval of the launching state. Capture that debris, bring it into the atmosphere to be burned up in the atmosphere, and then to potentially go back and grab another piece. We want to be able to reuse our servicing spacecraft on these missions. What we want going forward, though, is we want to see this as the baseline for a sustainable orbital economy that is circular. We want to be able to not have to rely on bringing objects back into the atmosphere to burn up. We want to service them in orbit. We'd like to repair them in orbit, refuel them. If they are debris, ideally at some point, bring them to a space station, repurpose them. There are foundries being developed in space. I'm talking a bit science fiction now, but that's gonna happen. It's gonna happen. So we need to start developing those capabilities and having that thought process that things are not just disposable in space, but they can be reused, they can be recycled. We want to focus on that as the future. As for trusting the private sector, come on, when have we ever not trusted the private sector, right? We all have the positive benefit of humanity in mind, said a little facetiously, but we do. I mean, it's why work the private sector on any of these aspects? What is the benefit that comes from bringing the private sector in? I think with any ecosystem, with any economy, it's to develop a service that is effective and efficient and economical. That's what we want from any private sector ecosystem now, right? When you go anywhere terrestrially, that's what you're looking for. That's what you hope the private sector will provide. What does the public sector, the state, or the multinational group offer? It offers development of regulations and rules, best practices to keep potential taking advantage by the private sector in check. So that's what's going to work together. But and that's what I think we, Astroscale, and we, the commercial sector, can offer to space is a service that is more economical than government space only. More efficient, more nimble, quicker to address problems and solve them. And that's what I think we're offering. I speak again, we, commercial sector writ large. That's what I think we can offer to the community. Now, I was in the government. I understand and I recognize very fully that there needs to be involvement from the government sector on regulations, on developing best practices. So it is a symbiotic relationship that we have to have. So the question was, trust the private sector, trust that the best product is going to come if we allow this kind of capitalism to proceed. Trust it 100% and wholly? No, of course not. That's why government has to remain involved.
Round of Q&A, I'm going to turn the floor first to Andrew and then I think to Vasily for some remarks on the question about a holistic approach, but also I think how does Paros and a focus on weapons fit into that big picture is my interpretation of the question. I can't promise you how different panelists will answer it, but I'll give the floor to you, Andrew, and then Vasily will turn to you for some remarks on that as well.
Thank you, Jessica, and thank you to the distinguished representative of China for that difficult question. You put me in a difficult position as the UN Office for Outer Space Affairs because the security side of the House is usually dealt with by our distinguished colleagues here in Geneva. I think you're trying to interpret your question as well. I think obviously Paros is a legally binding approach, right? I think that's trying to what you're partly getting at. I mean, take the long-term sustainability guidelines, and as an example, countries will say, well, they're non-legally binding. It's political will of countries. Yes, but they become legally binding once they're actually implemented international legislation. So I think from our perspective at ANUSA, when we're talking about having things that are binding, non-binding, at the end of the day, if it's implemented, it's binding, right? It's in national legislation. So I'll leave it at that, and maybe Vasily has some more comments, particularly on Paros, given it's a joint China and Russian Federation initiative. Thank you.
So thank you for your questions, and there is a very simple answer. In our point of view, those agreements on non-militarization and non-placement of weapons in outer space should be only legally binding, but those guidelines or maybe statements made by some states on voluntary obligations taken by states are valuable, and they could supplement those agreements. For example, this voluntary obligation not to place first arms in outer space, it's in our point of view, it is very valuable because in case being broken, the political losses for this state could be enormous, and the reputation of the state could be in danger. And but they could not supplement those agreements. Even there are some doubts they could be implemented and completed, fully completed by all states. Nevertheless, they need such agreements, and they need the common understanding that such agreements could provide basis for trust, because then we are talking about TCBMs. They, as said yesterday, they could be valuable and could be not. As Professor Shen and Deputy Minister of our office in Geneva, our embassy in Geneva said, Mr. Belousov. So in my personal capacity, I would add that certainly we need understanding. We need understanding, and we need understanding on approaches, what we are trying to achieve, proposing something or implementing something during our space activities. Then we are talking about the implementation of different techniques or tools. We should take in mind two different approaches. I could improve the reliability of my own space assets, but at the same time, that could affect the interest of other space actors. And sometimes, instead of doing something, instead of doing, taking some space activities, it's better to reject from using some techniques or some tools, not to interfere with the interests, not only with the activities, but with the interests of other space actors. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. We're just about out of time. I know there were a lot of questions here in the room, but after this, we're going to have lunch, and so you can continue the conversation. Before we say goodbye, though, I want to give each of the panelists, we're going to start with Chris and move down. If you have a crystallized thought, you know, something you really want to leave the audience with that's quite succinct, or a topic that we're not discussing that is flying under the radar that you think needs more attention to keep us thinking into the lunch hour.
I would leave with this, though. The future is watching us. My two children and their potential children and all of our future grandkids are looking at us now. And we have a choice of whether or not to address these issues, because space is only going to get more crowded. And if we want those future generations to have the same capabilities that we do today, we better take action now.
Okay. As final remark, I want to strengthen the idea of international collaboration for protecting Antarctic and subantarctic areas due to its critical role for the worldwide future, but also for international security. And I invite you to think carefully about the proposal on a moratorium or addendum in order to avoid the deployment of constrained space capabilities in Antarctic and subantarctic areas, and to try to find a way to protecting those kind of services being deployed during search and rescue tasks. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. For me, it's also this sense of urgency. There's a lot being discussed. There's a lot of technology being developed. There are a lot of solutions that are out there that can be easily scaled. And I like Chris's analogy of the future is watching us. And if there were a collision tomorrow in outer space and we lost those key critical services, you wouldn't be able to do internet banking. You wouldn't be able to look at Google Maps on your way to work. You wouldn't be able to check the weather to see if it's going to rain over the next week. You wouldn't be able to fly from one place on the planet to the other place on the planet. You wouldn't be able to import packages from the other side of the world because the ships wouldn't know where they're going. So if there is a incident in space, we're pretty much screwed. So for me, it's this sense of urgency that is key. Thank you.
Vasily, did you want to close us out with a final idea or thought that you want us to think about as we go into lunch?
Thank you, Jessica. Just in brief, I would like to say that despite the differences in our policies, I'm sure we should continue our dialogue on all aspects regarding not only safety of space operations that should be taken in copious But certainly we should solve this possible threat of militarization and weaponization of water space, because it's crucial to maintain and preserve outer space for peaceful use. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. With that, I'll give the floor to Almudena.
Thank you very much for that, Jessica, and thank you to all of the panelists. I think we can give them all a well-deserved round of applause.